This episode is brought to you by Indie Film Hustle Academy, where filmmakers and screenwriters go to learn from top Hollywood industry professionals. Learn more at ifhacademy.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Brian Petsos. How you doing, Brian?
Really good, man. How are you?
I'm great, brother. I'm great. Thank you so much for being on the show, man. I'm excited to get into the weeds with you on your new film, Big Gold Brick, dude, because like I was saying, I'm going to ask you in a little bit, how the hell did this get produced in today's world is fascinating to me. But before we go down the insanity that is Big Gold Brick, first of all, how'd you get into the business, man?
Sure. So I went to art school, and part of my education, which I sort of designed my own program, was I started off kind of on the directing path in film. And I grew up a film buff. Both of my parents are like huge film buffs. And so it was just always a thing that I really wanted to try to see if I could do and make stuff. And was very discouraged, actually, after a year with that kind of focus. I kind of always been like an ideas person. And that was so vocational that it sort of set me off doing other art making, basically. And then I was sort of coerced into going to SecondCity by a bunch of friends, repeatedly goading me. And so I ended up at the SecondCity doorstep one day and started studying there, and absolutely loved improvising. And then I started kind of studying what improvisers would used to call straight acting. Yeah, and then, it's funny because like our first day of class, I remember we all went to the bar after, and pretty much everyone wanted to be on SNL.
Of course.
And I wanted to make movies. And that's kind of what I raised my hand and said I was there to do. And I know it's a super kind of circuitous path, but I knew that was something I always wanted to do. So then I started writing. I actually got an agent as an actor in Chicago. Then I moved to New York. That agent got me a new agent in New York, was very kind to sort of set that up. And then I kind of kept getting more and more agents, eventually ended up at UTA as an actor. And then there was a point where I was writing and producing like short films. And there was a point where I just realized I had to like stop performing because I really wanted to take a crack at trying to be a fancy pants writer director dude. And I just felt like I didn't want to be that guy who I with all due respect to my friends who do everything, who are like, yeah, so I'm acting on this TV show, and then I'm also trying to get this thing I'm directing doing, and then I just was like, I need to go like full priest style and just give over and like just honestly, if it takes like bleeding over, then I'm gonna bleed. And so that's sort of where that went.
So you went full monk mode.
Yes, minus the haircut.
Yes, minus the haircut. Well, so you did a little bit of writing, directing with Funny or Die back in the day when they were kind of launching, and it was early on, right? They were only a couple years older or something like that when you were working with them, right?
Yeah, that was. They were so kind to me. They were, I did some stuff that was a little bit higher production value, but the stuff that I was personally directing was like really lo-fi, and still absolutely had its own kind of voice and stuff. But then we started. I was performing and writing and producing, and we kind of made some higher production value things that they picked up for the HBO show, and they picked up two pieces of ours and sort of featured them as like movie of the week in sort of inside the show, and gave it a like little premiere kind of moment, and that was really cool. And then and so at that that was a great help and definitely got some of that stuff out there, and so I'm very thankful to them still for that.
What were some of the lessons you learned from doing all that kind of work? Because I know a bunch of guys who worked at Funny or Die, and it's kind of like run and gun, man. Like you do everything.
Yeah. I mean, well, I come from a long line of like hardworking Greeks, and so this kind of entrepreneurial thing has been something. It's been a constant in my life, and for me, the only logical thing to do, even when I was acting, I'm like new to New York. It's like, let's just start making stuff. And I think that served me really well, initially. As I do think there's a point where you need to slow down and not just make tons of stuff and really kind of try to, concentrate your resources and try to make bigger, more impactful stuff. But I think initially it served me very well to just get out and kind of gather the troops and make stuff. So that entrepreneurial thing, I think, is absolutely a thing.
Now, you hooked up with a couple of little actors, Kristen Wiig and Oscar Isaacs. Back in the day, you were doing short films with them and working with them. How did you get hooked up with those guys?
Well, I mean, Kristen I've known for a while. Oscar and I had the same agent. We're all here in New York. New York is a very small, very big town. And so you end up kind of, running into people and becoming friends. And, both of them were involved with Lightning Face, the short that preceded Big Gold Brick. And you'll find a lot of the same people that were involved because I kind of developed those two projects in tandem. Because I was writing Big Gold Brick and I knew it was going to have a bunch of visual effects in it. And the only sort of kind of higher production value short film that I had directed was Ticky Tacky, which I shot in one day. By one day, I mean, I think we had 8 hours of the actual set. So, so with Lightning Face, I knew I could incorporate some of that visual effects stuff. And I felt like that was going to really help buffer out conversations when people got this Big Gold Brick feature script and they're reading all these crazy visual effects sequences. I was like, I can do it.
Here's some proof. Here's some proof. I did it.
That was the hope. And it evidently it worked out a little bit, I guess.
So then you've been acting for many, many years. What from your acting experience did you bring into your directing and writing?
For sure. I think to start with the writing, actually, I've been told that I tend to shed light on even smaller characters, or at least give smaller characters a moment here or there, which is something that I really appreciate, especially as an actor, because I do try to really think about creating a moment for everyone. But process-wise, improvising has really informed my process as a writer. So just me alone, I'm kind of improvising a ton when I'm writing. So that means me sort of going through and playing multiple parts in a scene, probably talking to myself, probably pacing around my apartment. So yeah, there's a lot of that. Yeah, I know it seems kind of crazy. So there's that whole side, which is absolutely a thing. The irony is when it turns to time to be on set and shoot stuff, I actually don't do a ton of improvising. I probably am trying to come out of the Hitchcockian school of let's come with a plan and try to stick to it as much as possible. That's not to say that I don't. I will absolutely let takes go places for sure, but I really need to know that what mechanically worked for me on the page, at least we get that. And I also don't think of improv as I need my actors to try to be really smart writers while they're acting. Let's have them just be really good actors and hopefully trust the text. So that's sort of, I also think you can improvise in space and it doesn't have to be saying crafty stuff. I think you can think about performing in an improvisational way that doesn't include necessarily having to create dialogue. I think that type of thinking I really hope I can foster. But I really work with everyone differently. I feel like everyone has their own kind of needs. Hopefully my past as an actor, even though I never reached any real heights, I had a fair amount of experience in different venues. Hopefully there's a commonality there and people can feel comfortable. And at the very least, that comfortability will allow them to explore, and I can guide them the best that I can.
It's really interesting from someone who comes from such a strong improv background. You are more militant, a little bit more militant to the page than I would have thought, because I would have thought that you'd be much more loosey-goosey on the page, but I feel that you're probably doing all the loosey-goosey stuff in the prep, in the development.
That's exactly what it is. I sort of consider my job as being a perpetual student of the medium, perpetual student of everything really, but definitely the medium as well. And I've read a lot about people that I admire that have similar kind of philosophies on this. It seems to me that that's going to be the way it is for me. I spend so much time writing a screenplay. Like I just finished my next script, and I've been working on it for several years, a fair amount of that full time.
Right.
So yeah, it's I write a pretty deliberate script. Hopefully I've worked out a lot of the kinks by the time you get the PDF.
Yeah, exactly. And any other profession, you walking around talking to yourself, they would commit you. But as a writer, it completely makes all the sense in the world. I've done that myself. Like as I'm writing dialogue in a scene or something like that, I'll be like, and I'll catch myself. I'm like, you're mad, but this is the process. This is the process.
I don't know that I was ever a big talking to myself person until I started actually acting.
That's probably a good thing, sir. I'm just saying you shouldn't generally talk to yourself.
No, it's like you're on the subway and you're running lines before an audition.
Sure.
Your mouth's going to move a little bit,
right?
And then you just start to just not really give a bleep.
And if you're in the subway, really, who cares? Really, in New York subway,
especially the New York subway, especially after the pandemic, no one really cares. Let's just be honest. No one really. You're on the scale of things that people are looking at in the subway. You're probably really low on the totem pole. The guy talking to himself with a script. God, it's just a guy talking to himself.
It's just a guy talking to himself. That's completely fine.
Exactly it.
Now, I've shot a couple. My last 2 features were mostly improv. So I know as a director and as an editor that it is fairly difficult to edit improv. So because it's just like every take's different. So you're trying to find gems and moments and takes. At least when you have scripted stuff, it's like you got the same line 20 times. But when you have every line's different, every take is different. It's so difficult. Do you have any advice on how you put that together in the edit room and all of that? Like I usually try to get whatever's on the script once out, and then I kind of let them kind of go. Generally, that's what I do.
I think I've not done a ton that I've directed that has been largely improvisational. I've performed in stuff that has been filmed that has been largely improvisational, but I always remember hearing about Christopher Guest having to wade through like 80 hours of stuff to get down to 2.
Right.
And that sounds to me like
it's insanity. It's insanity, dude.
Which is one of the reasons why, I probably don't want to do that. I mean, it's hard enough wading through stuff that was planned, quote unquote, perfectly. But I think, it's tough again also because time truly is money, and especially when you're trying to be conscious of a budget, the stuff really comes into play. But I would say, to me, managing a bunch of improvised material is I think in the edit to me would be largely organizational.
Right.
Finding a way to sort of, filter through segments like story beats as fast as possible, and then kind of honing from there. I mean, the closest thing I can think process-wise is the way I actually work as a writer is I catalog tons and tons and tons of notes. And my process is very editorial in weeding out or moving notes from one area to the other. So I think thinking about like that massive amount of material that way is probably, to me, the most logical way to do that.
Now, how do you direct? Any advice on directing improv? Because you've been involved with a ton of improv in your life. And, some people like Mark Duplass and Joe Swansburg and Christopher Guest and these kind of guys who do a lot of heavy improv, like to the point where it's just an outline, a scriptment, and they're like, okay, guys, you got to get from point A to point B. However you get there is up to you. That's how I basically did my first 2 features. And for me as a director, I'm just there to capture the lightning. Like that's my job. That's just my job, is to capture the lightning and make sure it doesn't go too far off the reservation and just kind of keep. But as opposed to a scripted story, your lane is very thin. Whereas with improv, it's a lot wider, but there's still a lane that you got to control.
For sure. I mean, I think, obviously you're dealing with, you want to be there to support a performer. I think, to me, good filmed improvisational stuff is not good until you have performers that you can really trust to do that. Because to me, it's interesting because coming out of, Chicago, at least the Second City thing, when I was there as a student, all the way in through the conservatory, it was, yeah, be funny, do good improv, but do good acting too.
Right.
And I know in the conservatory program, at least the way it used to be, it was pretty rigorous audition wise. It tends to like really scale down to less and less people as you go through that whole program there. And I think the people that end up kind of the last people standing are really good actors that are also really good at improv. And so I think that duality, that's going to probably yield the best results if you're a director who's, the level of collaboration is just different. It's a different kind of arrangement you have with the performer, I think. Mm-hmm. And so to me, it's really more of almost, playing the role of conductor in a very real way. Whereas I am more a voyeur, I think, in my stuff. Mm-hmm. Sorry about the siren. Yes.
You're in New York. It's completely acceptable.
Yeah, this is white noise. Where I
So if you guys didn't know, we're not in a studio.
Certainly not.
No, but I really do agree with your analogy of a conductor, because that's what it felt like for me when I'm directing that. You're just like trying to move the brass over here and the horns over here and the drums over here and all the different kind of components to make the scene work. But they have a guiding force, but they're on their own. And it's really exciting. For me, directing that kind of movie, it's like you're on the edge as a creative, and there's no net, and it's super exciting to do. Now again, you're making a $500,000, $2 million, $3 million movie. No, absolutely not. But if you're making kind of a lower budget film that you can do, it's super exciting as a director to play like that with the actors.
Yeah, I would imagine it is. I've got much more experience performing and directing the stuff, but I still love improv. I'm very grateful for the education that I have and the experience that I have. And again, like I said, I don't discount it in any way. I just try to think about it differently.
Sure.
For me, I will tell you, with Big Gold Brick being my first feature and me also being a producer, every eighth of page, I'm looking at, there's money being spent. I don't cripple my own, creative side of my mind thinking about that, but I am absolutely cognizant of it, and it's very real. The dollars, they are swimming away.
Oh my God, it's. I still remember when I was shooting film back in the day, and it was like when film would start turning on, you would hear it, and it was just money burning, and that's every second you're on set, money is burning. It's very valuable. It's some of the most expensive time on the planet.
I know, and that's I've talked about it before. It's so ironic that you spend all this time kind of in advance of actually shooting, and then you have this huge, very concentrated amount of time where you're working to the bone. Everyone is, and you're making yourself ill, and you just try to cram it all into the sausage casing, and it's super expensive.
It's an expensive sausage. It's an expensive sausage.
It certainly is. What a strange medium.
It is a weird and wacky world that we live in, especially in the film industry. It's just, and it's getting more and more interesting. Which brings me to, how in God's green earth did you get the financing for Big Gold Brick, and how did you get that film off the ground? Because when you see it, you're just like, I am glad that this exists in the world. I truly am. How did you get this thing off the ground, man?
Well, first of all, thank you for being glad that it exists.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so fun.
I say that about a lot of movies. I'm like, I'm so glad this movie exists. Oftentimes, those are the movies that I cherish, the ones that I say that about. I'm not saying you necessarily cherish Big Old Brick, but yeah. It's a great place to be. I'm someone, as I mentioned, an ex art school dude, and it sounds pretentious, but like the art side of it is like really, really important to me. The medium happens to also be entertainment. And that's something that I never want to disrespect. And I love movies that are just pure entertainment. But for me, the stuff that I really kind of worship on screen is the stuff that really takes that intersection and sort of savors it. And so that is kind of, especially for this first one, I was very deliberate in kind of, what I wanted this thing to sort of do when it got out there. The thing that I just finished writing is much bigger and probably a little more straight ahead. Not that there isn't a couple snazzy parts here and there,
sure.
Quote unquote snazzy.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm this one had to sort of be what it was, and I think having the two short films precede this screenplay getting out there, this is something I've talked about before, where there were certain people, both on the financing and on the talent side, who were like, this is just too much.
Like, wait, you want to do all of this and you've only done 2 shorts? Are you out of your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And then there were other people who were like, I'm down. Like, let's go crazy. Like, let's get this done. And that happened both on the financial side and with actors kind of coming and committing. Oscar was the first person attached because, the whole lightning face thing, the genesis of all that. And Oscar's always just been such a huge supporter, and I'm tremendously thankful. And I think, when the script started floating around the agencies and stuff, I was very pleasantly surprised with, it's like, I've said this, it's, you got a script out there circulating. The next thing you know, Andy Garcia is calling you saying, let's talk about your crazy movie. And so, that's a real moment, but
can you stop for a second? I gotta unpack that for a second. What's it like, for Andy Garcia to call you and you have that conversation for the first time? And like, are you like just kind of crapping yourself a bit?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like literally that's it. Yeah.
I think because I've just been such an Andy Garcia fan. Oh. Like his body of work is incredible. He's amazing. And I mean, it's I could talk about him for hours. But when he calls your phone and you've never spoken to him, yeah, you kind of need to stop shaking. And then you need to start talking about stuff. You're aware of the fact that he's worked with Hal Ashby, Francis Ford Coppola, Brian De Palma, Steven Soderbergh, and then this
the list
here with this hat on. So it's yeah. I mean, it's
and then me, yeah, like Francis Ford Coppola, Brian De Palma, Steven Soderbergh, and me, yeah,
and other people as well. But it's
yes,
you're
course.
thinking of yourself in that context, and it's absolutely petrifying. So yeah, but I mean, the way there's such a dance. If I can just talk boring producer stuff,
sure.
There's such a dance between compiling the cast and actually closing the money.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a film where, I wrote a film. What you see represented, I think, ultimately is pretty close to the script, pretty damn close to the script. There were a couple sequences that I had to peel some layers off because we didn't get quite where I wanted to financing wise. But I will say, having friends who make movies, I feel like we did okay. We did pretty good with the amount of money that we had to spend. Mm-hmm. For a first feature, especially, I'm very thankful for that. But yeah, it's a process. You get the cast and you get the money and you close the money and you make sure the cast is going to show up. And next thing you know, you're in Toronto shooting, and it happened.
Okay. Yeah. The waiting for the money to drop phase of the projects it's just torturous. It's like any day the money's going to drop tomorrow. Money's going to drop tomorrow, and you're like, oh. God.
Well, especially when you have it's coming from disparate sources.
Right.
One person drops out and you're like, what? Like, now I have to go get this $500,000 chunk. And it's a thing, man. And I do have to say, there were 2 times I think we thought we had all the money and we didn't, and it delayed our start date. And, you break down. I mean, I'm a pretty sensitive person. I'm no stranger to letting myself feel emotion. There's
Yeah.
Just times you want to rip your hair out, and you know, I mean, tears are shed.
Yeah, and I want to make a point of this is that you had, you know, Oscar Isaacs, you know, and Andy Garcia, and you had a really good cast, not a decent cast, an amazing cast, and yet you're still having struggles to close financing on films like that. And I want everyone listening to understand that they're like, oh, it's like, oh, well, you had Oscar on board, so it just must have been cake all the way. I'm like, no, that's the beginning of the conversation, is having an Oscar or an Andy aboard. That just starts the conversation. And then when that guy...
the beginning of the conversation.
Exactly. And if money drops out and you got to go find $500,000, well, Andy might be going on to the next Steven Soderbergh film, and you might lose him because scheduling.
Absolutely true as well. The schedule thing comes into play. And, you know, all of these people are represented at very big agencies, and, you know, the whole agency system is you know, I don't want to like rain on the mystique, but that's a business, man, in a very real way.
Oh yeah.
And they are trying to make money, and that's great. That's what their job is to make money. And if that means like carting an actor off to the next project, like, you're SOL, and that's that. And you're right. There's so many, the plates that spin. It's unbelievable. And you know, I've also talked, as you said, like, yeah, Oscar's my friend. Oscar's done stuff with me. Oscar's attached to this. Like, the pain involved in getting this movie together, it would be impossible for me to put into language. Yeah. It is not easy. It's not easy for anyone making an indie. As you said, it doesn't matter how big the indie is. If it's an indie, and even if you have fancy pants actors, it's torture. I would never advise anyone to do what I do.
You're like, hey, should I be an independent filmmaker? Absolutely not. Go get a real job.
No, look, I've said before, like, film is the closest thing I have to religion.
Yeah.
So if you want to be religious, go be religious, man.
Yeah, no, there's no question. And I always like to demystify this for people, because some people just think because there's certain cast involved. You know, look, Scorsese has problems getting projects off the ground. Spielberg has problems getting projects off the ground. They're obviously at a much different level than you and I are talking about, but they still, at their level, they're still having struggles. You know, the only person that probably doesn't is Nolan. He's the only person, I think, in Hollywood who could just basically walk in anywhere and go, I want to make a movie about Oppenheimer and I need $100 million. Who else?
Yeah, you're
gets
talking
that.
about one hand is the amount of people that can just ease into something. It's always difficult, from what I gather from as a student of other directors and just doing a fair amount of reading and hearing some stuff, you know, through people. It's always difficult. It's probably a little easier for Scorsese than it is for
no
me.
question. But the thing is, it's not Scorsese's not trying to make a $25 million movie, because he can make those movies all day. He needs $100 million movies about two monks, two priests.
$200 million movies.
Exactly, $200 million movies with like two monks that are, you know, going off and are silent for most of the film. Like that's what he wants to do. You know, so it's relative. I mean, look at Coppola. He's like, he can't get financing with Oscar. Oscar's gonna be in his movie, and he's like, screw it. I'm just gonna drop $120 million out of my pocket for my crazy wine money.
Well, you know, I had heard that, or I believe I read it. If I didn't read it, I heard it, that for Gangs of New York, there was a point where Scorsese wanted another $20 million or something. Yeah. And the studio was like, sorry, man, you're cut out. Like, we've given you more, like 1 or 2 times. That's it. He's like, okay, cool. And he just threw 20 million of his own dollars in. Now, I'm happy to say I could throw 20 of my dollars into Big Gold Brick. It did hurt, but to be able to buy coffee for my art department that day was humbling.
Wait a minute. How many coffees are you buying here? I mean,
I think it was like little Starbucks, so it was like 4.
4. I was going to say, I was like, $20. How many coffees are you buying with 20 bones these days?
Well, it was Canada, man. So
okay. So it's 5, maybe 5. Right. With the exchange. No, but I'm glad we're talking about this, because it really kind of demystifies it a lot for filmmakers coming up. Where they have these delusions in their head, or illusions in their head, that it's a lot easier once you get to a certain level. And dude, absolutely, having Oscar attached to your project opens doors. But it's the beginning of the conversation. It's not like, how much money do you want? Where do I send the check? That's not the way this business works with anybody, really. It really is very few people who have the ability to just make things on a whim.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had the advantage. I did have some money attached right away.
That helps.
Yeah, it wasn't a ton, but it was a chunk of the budget that was sort of pledged by, someone who's of a fair amount of net worth, and that also I think helps. Even the agents here, that at least this isn't like a total fantasy, and especially when they know some of the financiers, and it's a whole sculptural game, like I said, of just kind of the money in the cast, and you're kind of piling it all together and using your hands to work out the undulations of what the sculpture looks like. And it takes a little while. And then, like I said, in retrospect, it seems like it didn't take as long, but it was a slog, man.
Yeah, and that's another piece of advice. If you can have some money up front, nobody wants to be the first one to the party. So if you can have even a little bit of money, it makes everyone feel a little bit more comfortable that there is some money involved. So, and specifically outside money, because even if you threw in the first 20%, they'll be like, yeah, that's nice, but you don't have anybody at the party. It's still your party.
They're looking for faith. Right. And I think that's what it is a lot of times. And yeah, I mean, there's also two different kinds of businesses in the indie world. I think there are people that wish you had the next kind of horror film or the next whatever it is. And there are other people that aren't trying to make those kind of movies. And so I think you'll find, as you go through these conversations, the group divides pretty quickly.
Now, on Big Old Brick, as directors, we always have that one day, if not every day, but I always look for that one day that the entire world's coming crashing down around you, and you're losing the sun, the camera broke, the actors can't get out of their trailer, something happens. What was that day for you, and how did you overcome it?
Well, we shot for 30 days. I had about 40 days worth of stuff, and we had to do it in 30 days. So to answer your question, that was day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Every day.
I mean, there wasn't a day where, from a generator blowing up to, as I've talked about this before, we were on the 55th floor of a building, which is Megan's office, her law office.
Yeah.
And someone pulls a fire alarm. Elevators go out. Megan starts sprinting down 55 floors, takes her heels off and starts sprinting down 55 floors. Had to sprint back up 55 floors not a half hour later. I mean, to say that, that was the kind of thing that would happen about every other day. Losing locations.
Sure.
I need 100 feet of clearance on a ceiling in a studio, and I get 50. So I have to cut like 3 really huge signature shots.
Sure.
I have to lean on the visual effects more than I intended to, which is also an expenditure, after the fact. I mean, it's every day, man. Like, and I'm the writer, the director, and I have my producing partner, and then we also had Canadian producing partners facilitating locally. I mean, it's a tough job, man. I feel like just sort of that it was my first time, and it was just guns blazing all the time. I didn't allow myself to feel discouraged ever. It was just, I need to have an answer. I need to have it now. You are the person that literally everyone from whoever it is, the PA out there gathering cones to Andy has a question for me, and I have to have the answer to it. So it's no waffling. It's have the answer and just, take the beating.
Well, I mean, so if anyone's still listening who wants to be a filmmaker, you could just look. The bottom line is, look, anyone who listens to my show, knows how I feel about making films. I love it. It's an addiction. It is I call it the beautiful illness, the beautiful sickness. Because we're ill. I mean, we're not well. This is not a normal way. But artists in general are not well, and that's what makes artists great, and makes artists so wonderful to be around, because they're insane. And I say that with all the love in the world. But this is unfortunately one of the toughest businesses for an artist to survive in and thrive in than any other art. Really, I mean, music even is tough, obviously, as well. But music doesn't cost that much.
Exactly true. I mean, someone like me, I get paid every 2 years, man. I mean, it's that alone is tough.
Right. You get paid every couple of years, and you're just like, what am I going to do between? It's like but you got to love it. It's this kind of love for it. And like when someone asks, like, you know, should I go into the business? And I will say, absolutely not. If you ignore my advice, then you might have a shot.
For sure.
That's because if I say, oh yeah, come on in, it's great, I'm generally, you know, then I'm a giant film school that's trying to sell you an $80,000 degree that by the time you're in, you'll never pay that off. Like
exactly true. I do think it does help if you think of it like a calling.
Correct.
And not a job. And something that I've touched on before in conversations is there is a certain amount of sacrifice. I mean, it would be great to be Todd Phillips and make a movie as crazy as The Joker and make a ton of money making it. And
play in that sandbox. Play with that character, with that kind of those kind of resources, with that kind of caliber of talent attached. That's the dream, obviously.
Absolutely, but you know, you can't just walk into that door and be that guy. I mean, and so, you know. But I mean, look, those scenarios are out there. I mean, you know, but for me, it's like if you just keep your expectations low and stay humble, and you know, I don't live a very crazy lifestyle at all. I live a very, very simple lifestyle, and you know, to me, any additional money is appreciated. But I just keep it to where I can get the next movie going, and you know, that's the only way I know.
So after this movie, that Hollywood didn't come with the truck of money and just dump it on your. It's not. No.
I mean, look. I think people have read this new script a bit quicker than it took them to read the last one.
Sure, of course.
But yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, am I buying a new apartment this Saturday? I don't think so, man.
Not in New York. Not in New York.
Not in New York, man. Look,
no, in Idaho, yeah, possibly.
For sure, man. For sure. My gosh.
Now, is there something you wish is there something that you wish you could tell you could have told your younger self when you first started coming in from your experience so far in the business? Yeah,
I mean, I think, well, you know, that's a tough one. If I could have told my younger self that wasn't yet in the business, mm-hmm. I would say, you know,
are you sure?
No, I would say, being who I am now, I would say, you know, like, it's possible to make cool stuff and survive. I was very concerned, like, especially right out of college, that I was going to be literally homeless. Mm-hmm. And especially when you have not only desire to create, but it's a condition that you have to, which is something that I have. You know, I wish someone would have came in and told me, like, don't be scared, like, stick to it. You know, what I was going to say in terms of my time actually working in the business, in the professional realm, you know, I spent a handful of years out there as an actor.
Yeah.
You know, with a real agent, like, you know, a pretty big agent, actually. And, you know, it's even at the time, like, Oscar and I had the same agent. Oscar has already worked with Ridley Scott at this point. If Oscar and I are getting the same script, I mean, Oscar's like 5 notches above me on the roster there. So, you know, your job for someone like me was to go and audition all the time. And I would actually audition quite a bit. I mean, even getting auditions is I've found is miraculous. So I'm out there auditioning all the time. And you know, it's at a point when I stopped acting, I kind of started from square one with trying to be a director. And even though I've achieved, you know, no real height yet as a director, I've already achieved more than I did as an actor, as a director. And so
good for you.
I think this directing thing was a thing that I was going to do when I was like super old and gray. And something always felt wrong. And I got to the point where I decided to be a director. And I think you really need to listen to yourself and what is going to be creatively satisfying to you.
Now, where can people see the film?
They can see the film in theaters, on demand, and digitally, all at the same time, Friday, the 25th of February.
My friend, I'm very excited about the film coming out, and I'm proud of you, sir, that you got this damn thing off the ground. This has been it is a journey, and I'm so glad you shared the journey, warts and all, with the audience and with my tribe, so they understand even a little bit more how difficult the things are, and what it was like 5 years ago is not like what it is today, and what it in 5 years from now, I don't even know where we'll be trying to get these kind of projects off the ground. But that you were able to get this off the ground, it is a small miracle, my friend, and I'm so glad it was able to be made. And when you were saying films that I appreciate that are that were made, I always think of Mars Attacks. That Tim Burton got Mars Attacks made. It's not his best
studio system.
It's not his best film by any stretch of the imagination, but that it was made, that it exists, it is amazing. And when I saw this, I'm like, I'm so glad that he's been able to get this off the ground and it's out there in the world, brother. So I applaud you, man, and congratulations. And I hope everybody goes out and rents it, watches it in the theater, sees it on demand, wherever they get it to. So thank you, my friend. Thank you for the inspiration too. Hopefully we've scared off people who were never going to make it, and hopefully inspired people who now are like, you know what? I think I'm going to go for it. So I appreciate you, my friend.
I appreciate you, and thanks so much.